My name is Lisa Chase, and I'm a professor at University of Vermont Extension, and I'm the director of the Vermont Tourism Research Center. And I want to welcome you to the 11th virtual agritourism gathering. And our topic today is agritourism definitions and standards around the globe. About a year and a half ago, we developed this series as a way to stay connected during the pandemic. We're currently planning ahead through the spring, all the way through May, with at least one virtual gathering each month, leading up to the International Workshop on Agritourism, which will take place in Vermont in person, August 30th to September 1st of 2022. We know that not everyone is going to be able to travel to Vermont this summer, so we will also have virtual components for that conference. We're still figuring out exactly what that's going to look like, but I want to let everyone here know that the call for proposals to present is open now, and it will stay open through November 30th. We know there is a lot of uncertainty around travel, and it can be very hard to plan ahead for the summer. And we don't want that uncertainty to get in the way of your decision about submitting a proposal to present at the Vermont conference this August. So when you submit a proposal, there's a new question this year, which is you can select whether you would like to present in person, online, or you can say, I have no idea. You can check a box that says, I'm not sure yet. Becky's going to put the link to the call for proposals into the chat box. So anyone who wants more information can click on that link, which is the same place our recordings and registration is for the webinar series. Also, I want to emphasize that we are looking for all different perspectives, all different voices to be shared at the Vermont conference. You've seen at these virtual agritourism gatherings that we have a really good mix of farmers, different kinds of producers, researchers, extension service providers, tourism professionals, nonprofit organizations, educators, government officials, a whole range of perspectives and voices related to agritourism. That range, that mix is what we were looking for at the Vermont conference, because we think it is incredibly important for all of us working within the agritourism field to work together on these issues, questions, best practices, and resources. So if you are working with agritourism in some way, shape, or form, please consider submitting a proposal to share your experiences, your research, whatever it is that you're doing related to agritourism at the conference in Vermont. Talking about a mix of people coming together, let's take a look now and see who is here with us. I'm going to launch a poll. So you should see on your screen a box that says describe yourself. Check all that apply. And you can check as many hats as you wear. I know that many of you wear many hats. And it's been interesting over this course of the webinars to see how this mix has changed. Some webinars are primarily producers, other webinars are primarily educators, and we'll see how this one shakes out. And we also welcome you to introduce yourself in chat. So if you are willing to share who you are, not just in the poll, but also let us know your name, what country or state or province you're from, and what you do there, whether you have an agritourism operation yourself, or you're with a university or an institution or government. If you're willing to, type into chat, introduce yourself, and make sure when you type into chat that you check everyone if you're willing to share your response with everyone. Otherwise, I think the default is host and panelists, and we'll get to see who you are, but not everybody else will get to see. As a host, I got to see who registered. And as of a few hours ago, we had 271 people registered from over 30 countries. So I thought that was pretty impressive for a topic that some people felt was a little dry, agritourism definition and standards. I find it to be an absolutely thrilling and even contentious topic, but not everyone sees it that way. I'm going to end the poll now, and I'm sharing results. So let's see. We have a different mix this time in that we have more researchers than usual. 31% researchers, about a quarter nonprofit, government and government agencies and educators, and farmer ranchers. Really great mix. And quite a few extension service providers, business owners, and other. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. And we've got one more poll. And this poll is specific for today's topic. The question is, do you have a clear definition of agritourism for your work or in your region? Whether it's your state or your country or your village or your town. And we've got a few choices here. There's the simple yes or no, then not sure. And then my answer is too long for a poll. That would be my answer. I actually let you, you didn't have to choose one. You could check all that apply, because I was like, I might have to check all 4 of those there. So I want to invite everyone, just like introducing yourselves in chat, please take a moment. If you have a definition, go to chat now and make sure you click everyone if you're willing to share with everyone, and let us know what your definition is and where it's from. We will save chat. We're really interested to see how these definitions vary in different places. So we would love to see what your definition is. And if your answer is too long for a poll, type in chat, or no, not sure. Everyone can feel free to share with us what you think your definition is, or if you have no idea. I'm ending the poll now. I'm sharing results. And it looks like this is impressive. Almost half, 46%, have a definition. About a third do not. About 20% are not sure. And then we've got a few, my answer is too long for a poll. So thank you to everyone who's been sharing who you are and also sharing your definitions. I know chat gets a little crazy. So we save the chat and we'll sort through that afterwards. And if you have questions at any time, rather than putting them in chat, go to the Q&A box and put your questions in Q&A, because that way we can keep the questions separate from the chat. The chat gets to be a lot to look through after a while. We're now going to move on to the next slide. And I want to mention, this is a map of the US. And this is the status of laws for agritourism in the US. And as you can see, we got a bunch of colors here. Gray means there's no agritourism law currently in place. The green means there is an agritourism law. The orange is there's recently proposed legislation, but not existing laws. And the blue is there's proposed legislation and existing laws. So here I'm just showing you the range in the status of laws in the US, not even showing you the content of those laws. And I put up this map just to show there's quite a bit of variability among the definition of agritourism throughout the US, state by state sometimes, but also it can be county by county, town by town. There can be different rules, regulations, and policies, and it can be really confusing for people to navigate. Could I have the next slide, please? Since we haven't in the US come up with a clear, precise definition for agritourism that everyone agrees on, what we did come up with is a conceptual framework that outlines areas of agreement and disagreement. I'm going to come back to this conceptual framework a little later on, but first, I want to introduce our panelists today. Each of them will briefly share their definitions in their respective countries, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And as always, feel free to type into chat and Q&A at any time throughout. No need to hold your questions. Today, we are going to hear first from Dr. Sharon Flanagan. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen, Scotland. She is a qualitative social scientist with a background in rural topics, primarily focusing on aspects of agriculture, tourism, and networking in rural areas. Dr. Flanagan completed her PhD on developing and applying a framework for agritourism way back in 2011, and she published what I believe is the first agritourism typology in 2010. That is one of the reasons why we wanted her to kick us off today, is because I believe she was the first person to publish a typology of agritourism. And if that's not correct, somebody type into chat and let us know what else is out there, what was published before 2010. Agritourism remains a topic of interest for Sharon at a time when the sector has begun to develop rapidly in Scotland in collaboration with organizations such as Go Rural and Scottish Agritourism. And now, Sharon, I'll turn it over to you.
On mute. So hi, Lisa's introduced me already, but as I say, Sharon Flanagan. I'm from Aberdeen in Scotland, at the James Hutton Institute, and I've got a couple of wee pictures up there. One of them showing that I'm not just an agritourism researcher, but I'm also believe myself to be an agritourism consumer. A couple of wee boys who are all too happy to go out into the countryside and pet animals and get mucky, and so there's a nice wee picture in there just for a wee extra side interest. So yeah, so Lisa has introduced also this paper, which I wrote as part of my PhD. I started my PhD in 2008, and it was initially my intention to investigate sustainable agritourism in Scotland. And when I went to the literature at that time, it was a little bit messy. There was a range of definitions, a range of terms all being used kind of interchangeably sometimes. So what I decided to do, and what became the focus of the first paper of my PhD research, was aim to support better understanding, I suppose, of agritourism by proposing a framework of types. And at that time, it was a case of, we'll see what we start with and see what conversation comes from there. So this is what we started with. So it included 5 types, which I've got on the bottom of the slide there, based on 3 key discriminators. The first of those being whether or not it's based on a working farm. The second, whether the visitor comes in contact with agricultural activity on the farm. And the third being, if they do come in direct contact, whether there's that interaction can be classed as authentic agricultural activity that I'm coming in contact with. So yeah, so the typology was focused on the activity or the experience as opposed to the provider, recognizing that experience is the intersection between the provider and the consumer. One doesn't happen without the other. So that was kind of the focus in that respect. So what's interesting, and has been a subject of much debate since then, I mean, as Lisa said, this was 10 years ago, this was published. So that the inclusion of non-working farm products within the typology. So it's not my place to make a value judgment whether or not that is the case. But to my mind, the literature did include some products which were based off farm. So that was why it was included. Anyway, the other end of the spectrum, the authenticity side of things, again, much debate, which I'm sure we'll come on to at some point as well. So the definition and application of authenticity as a concept within agritourism is the kind of the crux there. So here it refers to the manner of interaction with agriculture. So for many people, it could also be applied to the setting. So for many people, it could be a case of, is it based on a working farm? That's the marker of an authentic setting. So so in the years since this paper was published, I'm confident the understanding's moved on considerably, and I constantly get Google Scholar alerts saying that the paper has been referred to, and yeah, it's a place to start a conversation. Not everybody will agree with it. Some people will, some people won't, but I think the conversation is what's important. And I think from my perspective, I think there's room for further refinement of this typology and updating, but I still believe it's a broad concept. And it does include multiple types to my mind. So depending on the nature of what's happening, what the activity is. So maybe nip on the next slide. I realise I'm talking for too long, but if Amelia can snip it on. So I wanted to use this opportunity also to show some of the wonderful agritourism offerings that we have in Scotland. I was actually at the Scottish Agritourism Conference last week at this time. Some of the examples on this slide here represent products that some of the speakers at that conference have on offer, including accommodation, food and drink, opportunities to interact with farming people, places, practices, a huge range. And one of the really interesting statements that was discussed by speakers at the conference last week was whether or not agritourism should even be thought of as diversification or simply as an extension of agricultural activity on farms. And for many people now, it's becoming increasingly thought of as the shop front for agriculture and food production and connection between the people or consumers and the places where their food's produced. I'll maybe nip on the next slide, the final one from me just now. So the first thing to point out, for me in Scotland anyway, is that the term agritourism is now not only known in Scotland. And 10 years ago when I was doing my PhD, I would phone people up and say, I would like to talk to you about agritourism, and they'd go, what's agritourism? So to me, that's a huge step forward. We can talk about agritourism now in a different way. We've also got an official body representing the sector in Scotland, a new strategy outlining a shared vision and action plan. There's an annual data collection mechanism started, and an underpinning definition which was developed by industry leaders and emphasises the importance of farming and food production as key ingredients upon which everything else is based. So you can see the definition on the slide here. In Scotland, we consider agritourism to include tourism or leisure on a working farm, cross or estate which produces food. And the pictures at the bottom there, this slide is captured from the Scottish Agritourism website. And that shows some of the types of products that we have on offer again. So I'll need to stop talking, but it's hard to overestimate the extent of progress that's occurred in Scottish agritourism in the last 10 years. And it's my belief that a combination of leadership, community, and identity building based on the USP of agritourism captured in the definition here has been fundamental, and it underpins an ethos in Scotland and a marketing element to it as well. With you can see what we call the funky coo. That's the cow with the multicoloured Wellington boots on, and it's also used as kind of a marker of quality and authenticity as it's pushed out by providers in Scotland. And just to close, what I think the Scottish case represents is evidence that the core of agritourism might be comparable internationally, but the context is also really important, and countries should adapt on that basis. And so for me, having this contextual definition in Scotland is really important in order to support the cycle of sectoral development and also data collection, so we know what we're actually measuring to take the sector forward in Scotland. And I'm going to stop talking there and apologise for talking too long.
No apology necessary. That was an excellent way to start us off, Sharon. Our next speaker is a fourth-generation farmer and first-generation entrepreneur. Mr. Pandurang Taware is from a small village in Baramati Taluka. His childhood was immersed fully in farming, and his father's desire was that Mr. Pandurang should study agriculture and work for the betterment of the farming communities in India. But instead, he studied computer science, and he worked in the hospitality industry for 20 years. In 2003, he married agriculture with tourism and launched Agritourism Development Corporation with a model agritourism center in Baramati. After running agritourism operations successfully for 3 years, he took on training and skill development in agritourism for other farmers. As of a year ago, March 2020, he had replicated this idea of agritourism on 628 farms in more than 300 villages, and the impacts were huge, generating 55 million Indian rupees to farmers' families and creating over 7,000 jobs for women and youth in the rural communities. Welcome, Mr. Pandurang Taware.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa, for this wonderful introduction, and my namaste to all my co-panelists. And good morning, good afternoon, all of you from various parts of the world. As you all know that India is known as land of villages. When more than 77 crore farmers live in 5.5 lakh villages in India. And that is why it is a true culture of India. Next slide, please. And this is what we defined agritourism in India, because it is all range of activities by the farmer's family to attract urban tourists to have and experience the farm on the 3 Tripoli formula, that is explore the village, explore the culture of the village and the tradition of the villages, and also experience the actual working on the farm to know where your food is coming from. And third is get enriched about new things on the farm. And that is how we feel that the agritourism in India depends on 3 most important factors. That is, the farmer has to have something to see for the tourist, that is various crops and various other things on the farm, actual farm. The tourist has to have something to do on the farm so that he can participate in the activities. He can, milk the cows, drive the bullock cart, ride the tractors, work in the actual farm, and also help and see the farmers market in the villages. And third thing, important thing is the tourist has to have something to buy on the farm. That is the fresh agricultural produce, the crafts, handicrafts made by the artisans in the villages, the products, handmade, homemade products by the self-help group in the women's in the villages. And that is how it all depends on something to see, something to do, and something to buy on the farm. And I think this defines that whole of activities and facilities by the farmer's family to attract the urban tourist, to generate the income, the substantial or what I'm saying is the additional income on the farm. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Very, very exciting to hear about agritourism in India. We are now going to move to South Africa. Jacqui Taylor is a passionate communicator, marketer, and entrepreneur. She has over 30 years communications and marketing experience in the agricultural and tourism industries, both nationally and internationally. Jacqui has succeeded in developing domestic and international marketing strategies for a number of destinations in South Africa and around the globe. Her focus is currently on sustainable agritourism, ecotourism, and rural tourism initiatives. She is the founder and managing director of Rural Tourism Africa and Agritourism Africa. Welcome, Jacqui.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I'd like to say hello to everyone, and I think Pandurang and I share a lot of commonalities in regards to agritourism. I think, and what I found in 2016 when I started off, I spent 2 years speaking to farmers, And I wanted to see what was possible and what was not, what their concerns were. And a lot of that I've actually written about, and it is on the website. So I know some of the questions that were asked were about business plans, profitability, how do we go about things? And those were questions that I did actually write about and answer. I think it's very important. People who come to Africa are looking for an authentic experience. You know, I haven't met anyone who, you know, you might as well go to a zoo wherever you are in Europe or America. If you're coming to Africa, you actually want to see a real or have a very real experience. And so I grew up on a farm, and it was a working farm, and I knew quite a bit about farming because I had a dad who insisted that I actually farm and get up, and there was none of this boys, girls stuff. I had my brother with me. We all did everything. So it was a good background for me to have. It was good to understand farmers. A lot of them are introverts, or they've chosen agriculture for a specific reason. But I think it's really important to note that Africa is an agricultural continent. South Africa, we don't have any subsidies for agriculture or tourism, and our farms have to be profitable. They are farms first, and then there are tourism destinations. And we have very strict laws about farms that cannot be turned into what I call theme parks. They've got to be farms, and they've got to produce produce, and that helps with the food security and other issues. So that is important to note, that the agritourism side of the business is real farming. It's not, yeah, you know, that photograph there, it's a fully immersive type of experience. And people love that. You know, there's been, since we opened up our borders in July, we've had an 82% increase in rural tourism in Southern Africa. So you can see that people really want to reconnect. And I think also just to, you know, the most common question is, I'm really tired of my children, Jacqui. I just want to go. And then I hear all about it. And then I say, well, just go to a farm, because, you know, they can run around and do whatever, and you can just rest or stare up at whatever, the stars, and the farmer will take care of them. So a lot of our farmers are very friendly. I've never met an unfriendly farmer, and the farmer community is very friendly. And the experiences, as Pandurang actually mentioned, and I've got my little sort of ostrich egg here. I've got to tell you the story briefly. So I get an invitation, and I've got 2 teenage daughters, and they teenagers, right? So we go to the farm, and the farmer says to me, right, girls, you're going to be up at 5:30 tomorrow morning, and you are going to be working until 8:30 in the morning. Well, the farmer put them on the back of his bakkie, or his, I'm not sure what you call it, but it's sort of like a farm vehicle. It was freezing cold, and I was invited inside the bakkie, so it was nice and warm. And the farmer took the girls through all the farming activities. And one of those was collecting ostrich eggs. And so at 8:30, by the time they were totally grumpy, because they'd done everything from branding sheep to whatever, he said to the girls, okay, so you collected ostrich eggs, right? So now we go to show you how you can make an omelet, but we're not going to crack the egg. The egg's actually very hard. we're going to show you how to put a pin in, and then we're going to cut a hole, and then you can make an omelet. And, you know, they are now 18, they're now university and whatever, but that experience on the farm, they will never forget. And they spoke to everybody about that. And that is the authentic experience that we're talking about in agritourism. One last thing, I know I'm talking too long, but one last thing I do want to mention is that we have game farms, farmers who farm with game. That is not a game reserve, okay? So when we talk about ecotourism, ecotourism forms part of agritourism, not the game reserves. We're talking about the farmers who farm with game. And yes, you know, there are various things you can eat various type of different animals, but also there's leather and other businesses that game farmers do. So it's really important that when we talk about agritourism, that we include the broader perspective. And I'm certainly not going to go into areas in South Africa or anywhere else in Africa and tell them, as in the farmers and the rural communities who are on the farm, what to do. It's a natural evolution. And I think, you know, with rural tourism, people can say, well, how, Jacqui, are you integrating rural tourism with agritourism? Well, rural tourism is an easy way to explain to target markets, consumers, what agritourism actually is and farmers in Africa. So when you talk about coming to a farm in Africa, you can see wildlife as well. So that is, you know, we have a lot of legislation in terms of protecting the farms. We cannot just take farm workers or communities and say, well, we're going to make this an agritourism cottage. We're not allowed to actually do that. So the workers stay on the farms, and there are strict labor laws about that. So, you know, when I look at this, there's not a day, and I work 7 days a week. I love what I do. And I know, you know, the people that I talk to, I have so many friends, and thank you, Thomas, for arranging the first agritourism conference in Italy. I have so many people, I'm just inundated with people who want to come to Africa. They want to work on game farms. They want to participate. It's just amazing. So yes, I better shut up now because I can see Lisa's going to say, shh, that's me.
Thank you so much, Jacqui. I could listen to you all day, but I do want to give Dr. Tomas Streifeneder an opportunity to speak as well. He has been working as the head of the Institute for Regional Development of Eurac Research in Bolzano, Italy since 2009. In his research, he deals with agricultural and socioeconomic transformation processes in rural areas, focusing especially on mountain regions. In 2018, he organized the first World Congress on Agritourism, and that is where I met Jacqui and Pandurang and Tomas and many others who I've stayed in touch with. And since then, Dr. Streifeneder has been actively involved in research concerning agritourism definitions and standards. Dr. Streifeneder, I'm handing it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa, and hello and good afternoon to everybody. It's really amazing to see you again. Could we have the slide a little bit later, please, because I want to focus on some other aspects. So or no slide or black screen or yeah. I want to structure my short intervention based on 3 points: goals, complementarity, and what is agritourism and what is not agritourism. So starting with the goals, obviously my presentation is inspired and based on the situation in Italy. Italy was somehow the pioneer and still somehow the international leader of agritourism, started in 1885 with an own national law, and we have about 25,000 agritourism businesses in Italy until now. So we have a quite high share of farms providing and offering agritourism. So concerning the goals, there are two aspects. One is that agritourism is an additional supplementary activity on the farm. This means that we have a contribution of agritouristic activities in a certain amount, a certain extent, from a time and income perspective. And if we talk about supplementary additional activity, this means that it should be at least less than the half of the amount of time and income, from my understanding. The other point regarding goals is the valorization of the assets of the farm. We already heard that by the other speakers. So it's experiencing farming, it's the restoration of rural building heritage, it's enjoying typical quality food, enjoying rural culture and food education. So this means we have, based on these goals, a certain experiencing factor and interaction that is inherent. This is integrative part of agritourism. The second point is the complementarity between the activities. If someone introduces tourism on a farm, this means that somehow the activity should be in a complementary way to those activities already present, the farming activities on the farm. And as Jacqui said, my philosophy is first farms and then tourism. This is why I called my publication Agritourism First, and first agriculture and then tourism. So we have to realize a predominance of agriculture from a temporal, timely perspective on the farm. This means, and this is in the case in Italy, that somehow it should be monitored and defined. And this is done by a certain limit of beds and seeds present on the farm. The other aspects that we need some specific limits regarding agriculture, because obviously if you want to go to a farm and experience agriculture, you have to really experience agriculture and not only something that is maybe agriculture, but is only apparently agriculture, but not real agriculture. I don't want to focus so much on the discussion on income, but I think in some regions we also have to think about not only the timely aspect or the temporal aspects, but only the income aspect, because some businesses do earn very well with agritourism. And now I come to the slide, please. What is agritourism? What is it not? And this is somehow based. My reflections were based at the time when I partially published this paper in 2016, based on the work done by Sharon and her colleagues. And I call it the concept of authentic agritourism, based on some. And there's the link to the work of Lisa and her colleagues and Dave on core and peripheral activities. So you see here, I call it, I make a distinction within the framework of tourism in rural areas. I don't call it rural tourism, because already rural tourism means a certain characteristic of something. And many of us in rural areas are, from my point of view, not rural offers. So this is why I call it tourism rural areas. And I make the distinction between authentic agritourism and countryside tourism. And authentic agritourism, and this is based on what already was said, is very much an exclusive happening occurring on a working farm. This means that the farmer is really a farmer, and the farm is somehow registered in a certain list and has a certain limit, a certain threshold on minimum requirements regarding agricultural area and so on. Then the structures and activities correspond to the setting of an active farm. This is very important. So all the framework, all the infrastructure on the farm is really the infrastructure, the facilities of a farm. The agriculture activities, as I said before, predominate the agritouristic ones. The accommodation, and here we have already some different opinions. The accommodation occurs in farm buildings. Often we see that it's not possible, and we have separate buildings to host the guests and so on. But generally, I think that this is a specific point and unique selling position, also a unique selling point compared to other offers, that the host can be hosted in, the guest can be hosted in farm buildings. And then we have obviously enabled interaction. And this is very important. We have what Jacqui said. No, this is the absolute advantage Agritourism can offer to the guests, that we have a real experience of the farming activities and so on. And compared to other offers in the countryside tourism, so we have tourism on a non-working farm, obviously. And then we have sorts of commercial, what I call commercial agritourism. And this is also based on previous work done by other researchers. And this means that we have tourism on a working farm that is very much characterized by hotel-like touristic facilities and accommodation structures that may be even decoupled from the farmhouse. So this here, my point is that we have to avoid to become too touristic and too hotel-like. This means also that we have to avoid to stage too much activities for touristic purposes. It should be really an experience on a farm as experience the daily life of a farm without too much staging. And then we have finally visits to traditional cultural sport and other events in rural areas. And we have other points that are volunteer work and roofing farms, so worldwide opportunities on organic farms. These are active working opportunities on farms, but these are not part of tourism, my opinion. So again, here we may have active participation of the guests on the farm, but the question here is again to which extent and in which manner. So we should really think about the unique selling point of agritourism compared to other offers in rural areas. And I think also only buying products, I'm not very content. So it should be more than direct marketing of agriculture products. It should be real experience on a farm, and it should at least be tasting and enjoying agricultural products on the farm. And this is why we need certain limits, because the share of this enjoying own agricultural products, it's at least in Italy, is quite high. We have 60 to 80% of the products that are offered for tasting and catering on a farm should come from their own farm, or at least from the farms in the surrounding. This means that obviously the farm should have certain products, a variety and amount of products available. Okay, these are some points from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomas, and thanks to all of you. I'm gonna, actually, Amelia, could you keep those slides up? Now that you've heard perspectives from India, South Africa, and Italy, I wanna share some ideas from the US. Here we've got another multicolored map of the US. Again, making the point that our definitions in the US are all over the place. That's not to say there aren't definitions. Some states, some counties, some regions have specific and clear definitions, but we don't have consistency. This is a map of enactment of civil liability laws throughout the US. And the different colors represent the timing, where some states have these laws in place, others don't. You know, one of the things we've seen in Vermont and in other states is sometimes the way agritourism is defined in the civil liability law may be different than the way it's the way that it is described in another law. So it gets confusing. And can I have the next slide, Amelia? Since while we do have a variety of definitions in the US, we don't have one single agreed upon definition. A multi-state team of extension colleagues created this conceptual framework. And the idea here is to show what we agree on and what we disagree on. So the agreement, and from what I'm hearing from my colleagues in other countries, is I think this is pretty broad agreement outside of the US as well, where the core is on-farm experiences and product sales that are closely tied to agriculture and that take place on a working agricultural facility. In Vermont, it's really easy. I can just say a working farm or vineyard or cidery. But especially when we're talking globally, I saw Sharon had, crofts and different languages. So to say it's working lands, and it could be a farm, a ranch, a vineyard, a cidery, an orchard, as Jacqui mentioned, game farms. The point is there's production happening there. Oh, and I'm going to say that folks in aquaculture, oyster farms, for example, are saying, hold on, we're doing this too, and it's basically the same thing, happening in the water, and we want to be a part of this too. So the core is that experience and sales that are connected to production, and they're taking place on the production, the place where the production is happening. The peripheral tiers, the outside tiers, are where there's conflict. So that's where it may be taking place on the farm, on the area of agricultural production, but it's not deeply connected to agriculture. So could be, a wedding that's there using the farm as a backdrop, not really using the local farm products or music or other events on farms. Or it's taking place off a farm. So a farmer's market or an agricultural fair that may actually be all about agriculture, but it's not taking place on the working farm. Those are the areas of contention, of disagreement that we see in the US. Regardless of whether it's core or peripheral, we do have a variety of overlapping categories of education, hospitality, outdoor recreation, entertainment, and direct sales of agricultural products. And with that, Amelia, let's stop sharing slides and move directly to the Q&A. And we've got a ton of great questions in the Q&A, and I came prepared with a list of questions from registration. So we're probably not going to get through them all in the next 10 minutes, but let's see what we can get through, and then let's make sure we keep this conversation going afterwards. I want to start with the question about food. I'm going to pull up the question, and let's see. August wrote, and I believe this is while Dr. Flanagan was speaking, I'm curious why the agritourism definition insists on including produces food as an essential component. So why don't we start with Sharon to address that, and then I'll open that to the rest of the panelists as well.
Hi, so I should start by saying this is not my definition. This is the definition that has been developed in Scotland by a group of industry leaders in preparation for, I suppose, an opening gambit for what it is going to mean in Scotland. I think the main idea of it is to ensure that connection between the agriculture, so it's the ethos, that agriculture and the tourism connection and food production being the main connection, and also the fact that the food in many cases being produced and consumed in the same place, whether it be taking it from that farm off the farm or get local farms coming together. And I understand that the potential exclusion of other things that are produced on farms, I'm sure that those wouldn't be necessarily excluded, and not to my mind anyway, but I think it might be something I need to go and discuss further with my industry colleagues in Scotland to try and pick that apart. I think that's a really valid point, so I'll pass on to somebody else for their perspective.
Thank you, Sharon. Do any of the other panelists want to address that? Go ahead, Tomas.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this is a quite good question, because obviously most of the definitions include somehow the aspect of catering and tasting agricultural products on the farm. And at least in Italy, this is very common, and this is one of the unique selling points of agritourism. But I think the question is right, and I think despite this huge relevance of catering and food on the farm, we still have, at least what I know, according to the statistic, 20% of farms that only provide accommodation in Italy. This means they are defined as agritourism establishments without providing food, even breakfast and so on. So in this case, we already in Italy, we have this case that we define agritourism as a business without providing food. And I think very important is the aspect of the extent of the stay, the extent and quality of the stay on the farm. So if you don't have products that you can not simply, as I said before, not simply buy, but taste and eat and enjoy on the farm, I think this is very important, because the other thing is direct marketing of farms. This is different, and is, in my opinion, too less to be qualified as agritourism. But this is my opinion. So I think the qualitative and quantitative aspect of the extent of the stay on a farm is very important. And food can be an instrument to guarantee somehow the experience and experiencing farm agritourism on a farm. So, but it could be also without products, yeah, at the end. But at least this would mean that we have a sort of accommodation, that we have a sort of farm tour, or a qualitative and quantitative extent of the stay of the farm in a certain way, in the framework of farm tours or interaction on the farm.
Go ahead, Jacqui.
Yeah, I think it really does depend. In South Africa, we have a number of different types of climates. And so you're not going to go to a farm and have a cow, a couple of chickens, whatever, because the farming is the main business. You could be farming with grain, you could be farming with apples. So that doesn't actually automatically mean that you're going to have a nice little plate of food and there's going to be a little tomato and whatever. The climate zones are so different, and agriculture certainly is the focus. So, you know, yes, you'll get homemade bread and whatever, but it doesn't mean you go to get a plate of food. That's sort of just how it is.
I'll jump in with a perspective from the US and say that in the US, while there's a lot of disagreement, I think there would be general agreement that it doesn't just have to be food. For example, you cut Christmas trees is a big activity that starts in a few weeks and goes all the way through. And fiber production, I can think of this beautiful farm in Vermont, Grandview Farm, run by Kim Goodling, and there, you know, people learn to shear the sheep, and then she teaches them how to spin the wool into fiber, and, you know, goes through the whole process where you end up making these amazing products. And so it's not food, it's fiber, and there's other, you know, non-food agricultural products and experiences. So I'll say in the US, I think it's much broader than food. I'm now gonna jump to another question. And we have so many that it's actually really hard to choose from these questions, but I'm gonna move to one that is, somebody asked early on, what is the difference between farm tourism and agritourism? Pandurang, Taware, would you like to take a shot at that question?
I think farm tourism and agritourism is one and the same, because the tourism experience is happening on the working farm. Probably in farm tourism, he or she might be thinking that, like how Dr. Thomas said, that the experience on the working farm and the managed, stage managed experiences for the tourist. But I think the farm tourism is an agritourism, or agritourism is one and the same thing.
Any other panelists want to weigh in?
Yeah, I agree. I think they're synonyms in a lot of ways. I think there's, yeah, used interchangeably, and I think depending on, I mean, I mentioned in my introduction that 10 years ago the term agritourism wasn't even really spoken, certainly here in Scotland very much, but farm tourism was a bit more recognised. So when I was speaking to people, you could kind of use those terms and they would put them together in their mind as being something that they could make sense of. So I think it could kind of comes down to personal preference possibly, but again, my opinion rather than an official one, if that makes sense.
Other thoughts from panelists, or I'll jump in? I'll jump in to say that I think this, this whole topic of definition of standards, we're using agritourism in part because this webinar series is a follow-up to the first World Congress on agritourism. And that's the term they use in Italy, coming from agriturismo. However, there's a lot of different words that are similar. Farm tourism, agritourism can be spelled many different ways. There's some people use the term agritainment to mean something different, slightly different, or sometimes they use it interchangeably. I'm going to throw in this, this complicated question of definitions and standards for agritourism. Also, let's put in the different words that people use. One of the questions I saw was, how do you see culinary tourism intersecting with agritourism? So there's a lot of related terms that need to be defined and sorted out in different ways. This was quite a few years ago. Dr. Carla Barbieri from North Carolina did some research on where they actually surveyed people using different terms: farm tourism, agritourism, I think agritainment, I think a variety of different terms, and found that the visitors were more likely to say farm tourism or farm visits, while the people working in the agritourism field, those of us on this webinar debating the definitions and standards, we were more likely to understand the term agritourism. Now, that research happened quite a few years ago, and I think agritourism has become more widely used, as Sharon pointed out. However, I think we have to throw that in there, the point that a lot of these terms are overlapping and inconsistently used. Wow, and that hour flew by really quickly. We're just about at the top of the hour, so I want to open it up if any panelists have any quick closing remarks. Now's an opportunity to say it, and then I'll say a few closing words. Anyone want to jump in with any final thoughts?
I think in India, our Honorable Mahatma Gandhi ji always used to say that India lives in villages. So if you want to see real, authentic India and the culture and traditions, you have to visit the villages in its live. So with this opportunity from Lisa and Dr. Thomas, everybody, I invite all of you to visit India and its villages and agritourism. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take you up on that offer.
Yeah, please come.
Any other final closing remarks?
Before that, Lisa, we have to visit USA for the agritourism workshop. And I believe, because from India, today I have the list of at least 21 farmers who want to join, in person in Vermont.
Excellent. In closing, we want to thank all of you for being here today. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. There were so many good questions. But we'll send out an email afterwards with resources and contact info for all of us on the panel. We definitely want to keep this conversation going. I know we just like dealt with the tip of the iceberg here, and there's so much more to dig into. We want to keep the conversation going on this topic, and we also have a variety of other topics and other aspects of agritourism that we'll be addressing through this webinar series. On December 7th, we'll be talking about women's empowerment with perspectives from Peru, Uganda, North Macedonia, and the US. And we have many more sessions in the works. All of the recordings, resources, and registration are posted on our website, agritourismworkshop.com. On that website, you'll also find details about the call for proposals to present at the Vermont conference in August 30th to September 1st of 2022. Remember, the call for proposals to present is only open through November 30th. And you don't have to commit to being there in person yet. You can say in person, virtual, or you're not sure. So please, if you're at all interested in sharing your research, your experiences, what you're doing with agritourism, consider submitting a proposal. And in closing, I want to thank all of you so much for joining us today. I hope to see you all again next month and hopefully in person in Vermont this summer. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.